Hello, and welcome to Waking Up Life After the Jehovah's Witnesses. My name is Matt, and this is episode one. This is something that I've been thinking about doing for a while, but I am a procrastinator. So I finally got around to it, and here we are. Thank you for joining me. I think for episode one, I just want to tell my story of waking up and leaving. I think that it's important because from personal experience, I know that I was inspired by the examples that I've seen on YouTube and Reddit of happy, healthy ex Jehovah's Witnesses. Obviously, anyone who knows anything about the organization, especially if you are a Jehovah's Witness or you've been a Jehovah's Witness, you know that the narrative they push is that um, when you leave Jehovah and his organization, your life falls apart. And I can tell you from personal experience that this is absolutely not the case. Um, so the more voices in this conversation, the better. Um, and hopefully, I can offer some unique perspectives and insight. Probably not, but you never know. So I think I'm just going to tell my story. And if you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free. I'd love to interact with as many of you as possible. So I am 40 years old and I was born in. I live in Cleveland, Ohio, and I'm very fortunate actually to live where I do because Cleveland has quite a large ex Jehovah's Witness population. I've got quite a few friends who have left, and um, I actually have a number of PIMO friends who are still in the organization and just can't leave for one reason or another, whether or not they're married or have kids who still believe, or a spouse who still believes, or they just don't want to lose every single person that they've ever known or loved. Totally understandable. Um, and I just got to say, I got to give them credit because I can't even imagine what the Pima life must be like these days. The organization has gotten so crazy, even since I left, even in the last 7 years since I left. It doesn't even resemble the organization from when I left, and it just seems to get crazier every day. So to have to sit through meetings and field service knowing that it's all lies just seems like absolute torture. So, my heart goes out to those people, and I feel for them. Um, and it sucks. It's just gotta suck. But anyways, I digress. Um, so yeah, I'm 40 years old. I was born in. My um, dad was an elder from the time I was born. My mom was a full time pioneer. Pillars of the congregation, really. Um, and I had a very strict upbringing. Both my parents were extremely devout Jehovah's Witnesses. They weren't the types that made any concessions. There weren't, I wasn't allowed to watch rated R movies like some of my friends. I wasn't allowed to listen to certain music like some of my friends. If it went against the guidelines of the organization in any way, it was strictly forbidden for me. Um, I couldn't have a trendy haircut. I couldn't dress like some of my friends if my parents thought that it, was inappropriate. So, very by the book Jehovah's Witnesses were my parents. I also have a sister who is 2 years older than me. She is married with children, and they are all in. So, my immediate family, my parents and my sister, I have not had a meaningful conversation with them for about 7 years now. So, like I said, I was born in, um, had normal, strict Jehovah's Witness upbringing. And then when I was about 12, my parents went out to dinner with the circuit overseer who was in town. And they came home all excited because apparently the circuit overseer had proposed the idea of them moving to serve where their need was great. He saw that they were probably in a financial position to do something like that, and he was really encouraging them to do it. So they came home from dinner, talking about it, and ran it by me and my sister, and we really didn't give it much thought because we thought there's just no way that this is going to happen. Um, but it did. At 2 weeks before my 14th birthday, we moved to Ecuador, South America, to serve where the need was great. And it should be mentioned that I was not baptized when this whole process started. And one of the biggest reasons why I did get baptized is because my parents were sending letters of interest to a number of branch offices throughout Central and South America, trying to gauge where the need was the greatest. And my dad told me, it's going to be really helpful to our cause if both kids are baptized. So there was a lot of pressure on me, and it just so happened that the convention coming up, a good number of my friends in the congregation were planning on getting baptized. So I figured I might as well do it, if everybody else is doing it. I didn't give it a whole lot of thought. I remember my parents told me, well, you need to pray to Jehovah and dedicate your life to him. And I did. And that prayer, like every other prayer I had said my entire life, felt very awkward. Felt like I was just talking to myself. Um, but I did it. And we lived in South America for 4 years. My sister was adamantly opposed to the idea. She went kicking and screaming. And I wrote a little bit about this. I started a blog a few years ago, and I really haven't updated it much. I got up to the point where I was about 20 years old, and then I haven't added to it since then. But I'll put a link to it if you want a little bit of my life story in slightly greater detail. You can read that. Um, but yeah, we moved to South America. I was there for 4 years. My sister moved back literally the day she turned 18. She had plane tickets booked and she was out. Um, I kind of hung around. I was enjoying myself in Ecuador, actually. That's one of the few things about growing up as a Jehovah's Witness that I don't regret. That was a great experience. I was a hardcore mountain biker, and the city we lived in was up in the mountains at 9,200 feet. It was just the mecca for mountain biking. So I was really enjoying myself. So I moved back um, maybe 6 to 8 months after I turned 18. And I actually moved from South America to Idaho because my uncle had retired and built a vacation house out there, and I had been chatting with my cousin on Instant Messenger, and he proposed that we get a job at the local ski resort. So I moved from South America to Idaho, and I lived there for a year, and then moved back to Cleveland. I was in Cleveland for, I don't know, a year and a half, maybe 2 years at the most. Me and my sister were living in my grandma's basement because my parents were obviously still in Ecuador. But then word spread to my parents that my sister and I maybe weren't doing as well as we could spiritually, and I guess my parents felt guilty about that. So they ended up moving back to be able to more closely oversee my sister and I's spiritual progress. So probably about a little before I was 21, my parents moved back into our old family home. And oh, hey Bradley, this is Bradley Cooper, by the way. Okay, we'll go out later. Sorry. Um, so sorry. Um, so yeah, we all ended up back in my childhood home. Um, and then I got married at 23. Had three beautiful children. Was married for 10 years, and then I started waking up. And what did it for me? My waking up process was not a clean one at all. It was messy and ugly and complicated. Um, but from memory, the first thing that did it for me was the tight pants talk. I remember we were in Detroit for this special convention, and Tony Morris was giving his infamous tight pants talk. And I was walking around with my youngest daughter, who at the time was very young. She was 6 months to a year. and I was walking around the concourse level and listening to this talk. And I remember um, he went on his rant about Spanx and colored socks and tight pants. And it was the first time I ever conscientiously questioned something that the governing body was saying. And I remember holding my daughter and looking around at the people who were walking around to see if anyone else thought that what he was saying was as weird as I did. And no, everyone was just eating it up. Um, and I remember after that we went to visit some friends in Phoenix, and it was one of the few friends that I was comfortable enough with that I could ask him his take on it because I didn't want to sound like an apostate. And I remember asking him and his wife, like, what did you think about Toni Morris's talk? And they thought it was great. And I came back to Cleveland, and there was a couple other friends who I felt comfortable enough bringing it up with, and they all thought it was great. So I kind of felt like I was a little bit crazy. But that was the first time I ever questioned anything. And I'm actually kind of embarrassed about that because it took me way too long. Um, but then, it was a downward spiral from there. I started asking questions. I remember I invited my best friend Stevie, out to lunch, and I had kind of alluded over the phone about what I wanted to talk about. So he showed up, and I think he brought along the Bible Teach book. And I just remember sitting there, just kind of, not knowing how to say what I wanted to say. And I just remember saying, like, Stevie, like, how do we know? How do we know for sure that this is the truth? And all he could do was recommend that I read the Bible Teach book. And I remember thinking, well, this is not the answer that I was looking for at all. So I basically had what looked like a midlife crisis. Um, Leading up until this, and I should point out it. Let me backtrack a little bit. I was not a model witness at all. Um, it just never resonated with me. Um, and part of it has to do with my parents' parenting techniques, which I'll get into in a later episode. But um, field service was absolute torture. I remember my mom would use um, Bible study as punishment. Anytime she was upset with me, she would send me to my room and tell me that not to come out until I was studied for whatever meeting was next that week. And then she would make sure that my kingdom ministry was fully studied. She would ask me, she would quiz me on it. So my parents didn't necessarily make being a Jehovah's Witness appealing, but also I just never really felt it. It was always torture for me. I never looked forward to meeting nights. I never looked forward to field ministry, and I felt like that was a deficiency on my part. I was always made to feel like that was a shortcoming. Then that was my fault, and that's something that I needed to work on. So, like I said, I was married when I was 23. My wife at the time was 19, which is very young, but not at all uncommon in the Jehovah's Witnesses. And I can say with all certainty that I was not a good husband. Um, and I take full responsibility for that, although I will say that, growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, which is obviously a very misogynistic organization, many Jehovah's Witness males are not equipped to be good husbands, at least not in today's world. So, um, yeah, eventually I got to the point where I was just deeply, deeply unhappy, and I didn't know why. I was working a ton, um, just trying to make ends meet. But there was just, I was I was a basket case. I was having what I thought was like a full blown midlife crisis. I didn't know what was going on, but there was a storm raging in my head 24/7. And I went a little bit crazy. Honestly, I was um, a full blown alcoholic. As far as what's considered an alcoholic, I definitely was an alcoholic. It was totally unaddressed, but I could not let alcohol touch my lips without getting blackout drunk. And I kind of had a reputation for that within the organization, which I think is funny now because as far as alcohol is concerned these days, I can take it or leave it. Um, but I had access for a little while. I had access to pills, and I was taking pills, which I don't think anybody really knew about that. But I was definitely headed for a crash, and oh boy, did I get there. Um, like I said, I was just deeply unhappy, and I didn't know what to do about it. I didn't know how to deal with it. I ended up having an affair, which led to the divorce. Which I wish I could say that this was the point where I woke up, but still, I got disfellowshipped, um, moved out, and initially I had every intention of going back, um, except that I moved into an apartment and I told myself, I'm going to give myself like a month to kind of reset, and then I'll get back to meetings. And then a month passed, and 2 months passed, and 3 months passed, and I just could not muster the motivation to put on dress clothes and go to a Kingdom Hall. Um, and it was around this time that I really started allowing myself to delve into what would be considered apostate literature or material online. Um, I hadn't yet discovered Lloyd Evans, which, if you don't know who that is, you're living under a rock. But no, I'm just kidding. Check him out, as well as Mark O'Donnell, also known as John Redwood. These guys are doing amazing work when it comes to drawing attention to the ex Jehovah's Witness cause. And Lloyd just does an absolutely fabulous job of breaking down all the material that the organization releases and really uh, bringing out just how wacky it is. So uh, I'm not going to do any of that with my channel. I'm going to leave that to him. He's the expert in that regard. But yeah, check them out for sure. I'm sure you already know who they are. But anyway, so I hadn't yet discovered Lloyd Evans at this point, but what I did do was read Crisis of Conscience, and that is a death knell to any Jehovah's Witness. You cannot read that book. I'm thoroughly convinced that you cannot read that book and still believe that the Jehovah's Witnesses are the one true religion. That this is God's one earthly organization. Um, I remember I had started reading it. I was disfellowshipped at the time. I still had a job. I was working for a company that was owned by two elders, and I'd been working for this company for a total of, at this point, almost 10 years. I had worked my way up to a position. I was the project manager for them, and I was doing quite a bit of work for them. And I got disfellowshipped, and I think they knew that legally they couldn't fire me. Obviously, they knew that. And at first, it wasn't necessary. For the first year and a half, um, I didn't do or say anything that would cause them concern. But then I was on a job with one of the owners who was an elder, and I had started reading Crisis of Conscience, and I asked him what he knew about Ray Franz, because he had been at Bethel, and I was just wondering if maybe his time at Bethel had overlapped with Ray Franz's time at Bethel. And although it hadn't, as soon as he heard his name, his response was immediate, and he said, that man had a problem with pride, and um, that's the common response to anyone who says anything about the organization is that they have, they need to humble themselves, because no one should be questioning anything that's coming from the organization. So I finished Crisis of Conscience, and it was at that point that I knew that it was just all BS. So that was about a year and a half after I was disfellowshipped, and once my elder bosses figured out that I definitely was not coming back, and even perhaps maybe turning against the religion, um, they did everything they could to force me out, and they hired an elder from another congregation and installed him in basically in my position and told me that I would then be his subordinate, even though he had no previous experience in the industry and he had none of the certifications that I had. He knew absolutely nothing about the work that we were doing, and yet he was my boss all of a sudden. And he basically treated me like garbage until I was forced to threaten them with religious discrimination, which got their attention. And then they offered me a severance package, which I very stupidly signed. I should not have done that because it was piddly. And in retrospect, I should have gone another route, but that's for another day. So, so yeah, it was about a year and a half after I got disfellowshipped that I really, truly woke up, and it has been quite a learning experience since then. Um, you can start with one little thing, um, as far as what creates doubts, and you can realize that that aspect of the JW belief system is wrong, and still somehow hold on to a bunch of other things. One of the things that I realized was that even though I was technically awake, I still had a lot of deeply ingrained indoctrination to weed out. For example, even though I knew that it wasn't the truth, I was still very much homophobic. I was still very much a creationist. And it wasn't until, and you got to kind of go through these things one by one and figure out how you feel about them, because this is stuff that I just took for granted, that I just, knew in the back of my head to be truth, and I didn't really question it. And then, once I left, I became friends with a number of homosexuals and realized, wow, homosexuals are totally normal people. They just have a different sexual preference than I do. And and that was an easy one for me. Um, it, I grew up, as a Jehovah's Witness kid. Me and my friends, would call each other fags all the time, and that's just the way it was. And we thought it was hilarious. And there was nothing wrong with being a homophobic person as a Jehovah's Witness, because they're all, being gay is wrong. So I didn't have a problem shedding that idea. I think that was one of the easier ones for me. But then I also realized that, I started to question whether or not God even exists. And one of the things that was kind of forcing me to hold on to the idea was the idea of creationism. And so um, I think it was, I was watching an interview with Lloyd Evans was interviewing Howie Rutledge. And if you haven't seen that interview, look it up. It's excellent. And Howie was talking about how his waking up moment was actually reading a book by Richard Dawkins on the subject of evolution. And so I went out and I bought that book and I read that book. And when you read a book that is written by a scientist whose job it is to explain the biodiversity of our planet, and he breaks it down for you in very easy to understand terms, at least for me, it became very obvious that evolution was absolutely plausible. Definitely more plausible than the explanation that Jehovah's Witnesses offer for how life got here. I'm much more inclined to believe that the evolutionary process is what took place over God creating everything. At least now I am. So yeah, it's very important, I think, to examine uh, any preconceived ideas that you might have after leaving, one by one, and figuring out which ones are rooted in your JW past and which ones are not, because you might be surprised. So that pretty much brings us to where we are today. Um, Once I realized that just about everything I had been raised to believe was utter bullshit, uh, I just couldn't handle that. The dude does not abide. So I've been a full blown apostate for a few years now, and uh, I think it's funny how weaponized the term apostate has is within the Jehovah's Witness organization, because an apostate is just someone who has renounced a previously held religious or political belief. There's nothing inherently wrong with it, but obviously it's just the worst thing you can possibly be within the Jehovah's Witness organization. Um, but I'm not willing to stand by and let this organization take my friends and family from me. And not that I expect to get any of them back. Um, but I feel like if what I'm doing and saying can plant a seed of doubt in one person that leads to them waking up, then it'll all be worth it. So I'm looking forward to doing this. I'm looking forward to seeing if you guys have any questions or comments and responding to them. So I guess that's the end of episode 1, and I hope you enjoyed it. And we'll see you next time. Thanks. Just as a PS, sorry, I forgot to mention this earlier. I just want to give a shout out to a friend of mine who shall remain nameless for the time being, but she designed and made this shirt for me. I posted a picture of myself wearing it on Reddit, and in the title, I feel really bad because I said she bought it for me. She did not buy it for me. She made it for me, and I really appreciate it. So, you know who you are. Thank you.